The Kremlin is engulfed in a silent civil war, a dangerous echo of the chaotic 1990s power struggles. As factions are fighting for survival, Ukraine is striking at their heart, accelerating the internal decay. The Kremlin's facade of unity is shattering under pressure. War failures and internal conflict are causing deep cracks. Daily events reveal desperation within the elites. This system is beginning to cannibalize itself for survival. This fight isn't just about Ukraine anymore. It's a silent civil war within the Kremlin's walls. The powerful factions now are battling for limited resources. They are fighting for Putin's favor, a very finite commodity. The old rules of Kremlin power are breaking down as Putin's projection of strength is visibly fraying. This internal chaos is breeding fear and is also breeding betrayal. It is creating the perfect conditions for self-preservation. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor who studies Russia. And in fact, the situation within Russia is getting pretty slippery. It's not looking good. And here's why. When we look at things such as the attacks carried out by Ukraine just last night on Russia, it does more than attack Russia's infrastructure. It does more than slow down their war effort. It does a lot to destabilize the Kremlin. The Kremlin is made up of different factions, and those factions we'll get into today. Today, if you understand what's going on there, you'll see why Ukraine's strategy is so brilliant. This is not just about what happens in some town. This is not just about one of the directions or axes of this war. This is about fundamentally going for the gut, making sure that Russia can no longer fight by dividing those in the Kremlin. So let's take a look at these different factions, who they are, what they are, why they're fighting, and how Ukraine's attacks are fitting into this larger picture. Help me, though, get the truth of what's going on here in Ukraine, where I am right now, and what's really happening inside of Russia to more people. Russia is the country that is falling apart right now. Russia is a country as a leadership that is divided, not united. Ukraine is united, and Ukraine is winning. You can help me do that by doing just this: liking this video, subscribing to this channel, and considering becoming a channel member today. I thank you. So within the Kremlin, there are these different factions, these different blocks, and those include things such as the security bloc. That's the Slovaki, as they're called in Russian. Now, they're the ones that come from the KGB or the FSB, but since 2024, they've had some significant problems. Their longtime leader, Nikolai Patrushev, who's a longtime friend of Putin's, going back to the 1970s when they had KGB together, Patrushev was demoted. He was taken off of the Security Council. He was given a new job. He's now in charge of the building of boats, shipbuilding. So that's probably a very clear sign when you go from being in charge of the most important council in the country to in charge of making sure that the boats float, that you are no longer valued. But why was he pushed out? Well, he was pushed out because the war is a total disaster. Because of things like Prigozhin. The Yevgeny Prigozhin uprising with the Wagner Group was shocking. That blew the minds of the people in the Kremlin. But people had to pay for that. That sort of a mistake can't just go by and nobody has to suffer. We saw the firing of other people. We saw the firing, for instance, of the Minister of Defense, Shoigu. We saw the arrest of the Deputy Minister of Defense. He, in fact, got 13 years in prison. So there was definitely some sort of a comeuppance for this heir. But not everybody's happy about this, specifically those from the security bloc. Patrushev is not happy to see that he's been removed from the pinnacles of power. Now, of course, his son remains. He's the deputy prime minister. His name is Dmitry. And as we discussed yesterday, Dmitry is engaged in a huge amount of corruption, along with the Minister of Agriculture, who is de facto his common law wife, with whom he's also embezzled about $120 or $150 million via the banks associated with the ministry. But neither here nor there. Why are they stealing this money so fast? And as we discussed yesterday, simple reason: they think that Russia is losing and they want to get out as much cash as they can while they still have the opportunity. The old guard is simply ripping off everything they can. But who's rising, and how does this affect Ukraine? Well, the technocratic economic bloc are the guys like Andrei Bulusev. He's the current Minister of Defense of Russia. Or Elvira Nabiulina. She's from the central bank. Now, she's very intelligent. She's a smart woman. And that's really a problem because she has been able to keep Russia afloat. She's the one that has the strategy to fight inflation, to maintain stability. She is the one who is able to manage these crises that Russia is currently in. But today, the old guard realizes that people like her are a problem. She is trying to prevent things like the mass theft of money. She doesn't like to see all of this corruption because it's bad for the economy of Russia. But these people, they don't want to see that. It doesn't help them at all to see someone like her. They're checking that the books are balanced, making sure that every ruble is spent where it should be spent. That's not exactly what they have in mind as a good time. And so they are now trying to come up and fabricate different charges against her, to come up with excuses to have her fired, to get her replaced. And why this matters? Well, because if she does get replaced and a populist is put there, or somebody who's simply a yes man, that would undoubtedly lead to a disaster for the economy of Russia. She's the one that's being fiscally responsible. The rest of the Kremlin are populist. They'll do whatever suits the moment. There is no strategy to it, and they regularly make very bad economic decisions. But she's the one that is navigating the storm for the Kremlin today. But recent things have come out to indicate that they are trying to replace her. They are trying to fabricate documents and other evidence that shows that she is an enemy of the Kremlin. They are trying to convince Putin to get rid of her. But how does this fit into the war? How does this fit into what is going on with the attacks done by Ukraine? Well, it's very interesting. You should ask. Look at the attack on the Bryansk chemical plant just last night with storm shadows. Ukraine was able to attack that plant. That was the one that produced gunpowder, explosives, rocket fuel, all things crucial for sustaining firepower. It's a permanent destruction that will directly set back the Russian military. But more than that, more importantly for the people in the Kremlin, it undermines the resources controlled by Shoigu's network. This deep attack by Ukraine, it does more than simply slow down the military. It slows down their ability to have resources. That causes them to fight for resources then with others in the elites, to fight with people from the security bloc. And that's why we've seen the arrest, as we've discussed many times now, the 17 different Russian military officers, or I should say generals, that have been arrested since the beginning of this war. It's about resources. They were people, 15 of the 17, that came from the field of logistics or acquisitions. So why is it the FSB is going after them? Why is it that people in the security bloc go after them? It's because they want the resources. But these factories are being destroyed, like the one in Saransk. In Saransk, we saw the mechanical plant that was attacked by drones. This is a massive part of Rostec. It's a state defense conglomerate. This plant makes the critical components for mines, grenades, detonators. And disrupting this means more than just disrupting Russia's war effort. It's hitting the pocketbook of the people around Shoigu. Ukraine is attacking different industries that are tied to the people in the oligarchy. Now, all these different blocs are taking losses. In the case of Patrushev and the security bloc, they're being pushed out of positions so they can embezzle less money, hence why they're trying to embezzle as much as they can right now. In the case of those who are coming from the military industrial bloc, they face two threats, Ukrainian drones, but also people from the security bloc who are coming after them for resources. But there's actually a third one as well. Those are the technocrats who are coming to check that the money's not being embezzled. They don't like that much either. But today, they are facing another threat. Some of their friends, their best allies, are being killed in this war. Now, they're not the only ones suffering this way. Patrushev and his allies are also suffering this way. In fact, documents came out today showing that a large number of Russian senior officers, about 58, from the FSB's elite units, as well as the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence, have been killed during the war. Losing these sorts of operators is a big deal. Each one of them probably has about 10 plus years of training, and there's a very limited number of them. But they're also the key players, the key operators for the Siloviki. They're losing their top people in the course of this war. So each one of these groups, each one of these different blocks within the Kremlin is being drained. Simultaneously, we see the attacks that Ukraine is carrying out other places, such as the railroads being blown up between Pskov and St. Petersburg last night, or the attacks that we've seen on the other Russian railroads across Russia. And look at the other attacks, though. Look at the other attacks and think about how this affects the power dynamics of the Kremlin. Look at the drone attacks at the Bryansk substation, or the attack on the Orenburg gas processing center. Why this all matters? Well, at this point, those resources were very needed by a technocratic class. Those people in the Kremlin needed that money. Now that they don't have the money, now they're going to lose money due to lack of having these resources, they're going to have to tighten their belts about the resources that were otherwise to be spent on the security bloc and its friends. The financial system itself is flashing red warnings. This is intensifying the Kremlin's power struggle. The central bank is trapped. Think about this. The runaway inflation within the country is just getting worse and worse. It was about 6.7% monthly in September. Critical labor shortages, about 2% unemployment, are fueling the wage inflation. So the Kremlin is running out of money and has factions fighting with each other. Each one of those factions is losing resources. It's losing men on the front. It's losing its resources that it gets from the Kremlin, from the central bank, because there's simply not enough money for them. And so they're fighting with each other to take each other's means of getting money, fighting with each other's means of production, trying to be sure that they get the last ruble. Now, as this goes on, there's something else that is very important here, and this is going to affect the future of the country, not just this war. Consider this. When Ukraine carries out these attacks within Russia, it's playing into the hands of the fight within the Kremlin. There are limited resources, and this is more than about just slowing down the soldiers in the front. This is not about cutting off supply lines. Ukraine does that as well. We see it every day. But there's another aspect of this. It's how it fuels the fire that we see there in the Kremlin. These different blocs are not interested in what's good for the country. We discussed it yesterday how Patrushev's son, who has a very good chance of becoming the next leader of Russia, is himself engaged in this mass corruption. He doesn't care at all about the future of the country. He's not worried about what this means for the war effort. He's worried about what this means for his bottom line. And Russia's become poorer by the day. The average Russian is suffering as a result. Russian soldiers are dying because of it, and none of them care. So ultimately, how would the end of Putin look? Why does this all matter? Well, ultimately, the end of Putin would look like this. It would look exactly like this. The factions within the Kremlin itself would begin to fight with each other, begin to eliminate each other. And we see the fact that now there is this interest to do so. We see that they are coming up with cases, fake information, to try to destroy the head of the central bank, the only person who is keeping the Russian economy running. So why would they do that? Self-interest, not Russia's interest. Why is it then that the security bloc is going after people such as those in the military? It's once again not Russia's interest, it's self-interest. And why is it those in the military are so worried about these factories, making sure that they get more money? Well, they don't really care about what they produce or the quality or what happens with it thereafter. They care about getting paid. That's the only thing they care about. But when there's less money to get paid, when there's less ability to get cash into their wallets, what do? They fight with each other. They stab each other in the back. And today, all of this economic fragility is allowing for each one of them become a scapegoat before Putin. Each one is blaming the other for what's happening. And it's part of why Putin gets such false reports about the true situation within Russia. He receives totally bogus information, most likely, from each one of these groups. Each one of these groups is trying to justify before him that they're the good guys. They're the ones really on his side, are really fighting for Russia, while the other ones are lying. You remember right before the full-scale invasion when there was a meeting between Putin and his senior leaders. What was interesting about that was that the only ones who wanted to speak the truth were incredibly nervous, visibly nervous, because they realized that the situation within Ukraine was not going to give itself to a 3-day war. But some of the other ones tried to behave as if everything was fine. It'd be an easy war, 3 days, and it'll be over. And Putin listened to them, the yes men. But those yes men betrayed him. They had told him that everything would be fine, that they had the situation under control. But quite clearly, the situation was not under control. And today, Russia is facing the consequences of that. Over 1,200,000 Russian soldiers killed, injured, or AWOL since the beginning of this war. It's pretty amazing. But today's different factions don't care about that. They don't care what happens to the Russian soldiers or about what happens next inside of Ukraine. They care about what it means for their resources. So today when we look at what's happening in Russia, keep this in mind. Though Russia appears strong, though it likes to give off the image of being a superpower, it's not. Russia is not a superpower. Russia is a country that at one point in history did have power in the Soviet Union, more than 30 years ago. Today, it is a country that is falling apart. And the Putin regime itself is at the very center of that. It is the nexus where everything is beginning to collapse. So despite what you read in the news, have no doubt about it, the situation inside of Moscow is becoming ever more tense. The fighting is becoming more brutal. And every any given day, we might wake up and read the news that the Putin regime, like the man himself, has come to a dramatic end. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. and please consider becoming a channel member today. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.